Hello and welcome to this coverage of the Louise Borglit case. This is a case that is pretty old and pretty unique from Denmark. The murder in question happened back in 2016, where Louise Borglit was out walking her dog. She was attacked, stabbed 11 times, and had her nose cut off, among other injuries to her body. But this case is unique in that there's no physical evidence linking the suspect to the murder. There's no DNA evidence, there's no murder weapon. Everything in this trial relies on secret recordings made in prison by an undercover agent. We have heard the suspect's version of the story, we have heard the tapes and the undercover agent's feeling about the suspect's mannerisms when he was telling him about the things we heard on the tapes. But is that enough? Because, like everywhere else in Denmark, every reasonable doubt has to fall in favor of the suspect. This case, for you who maybe don't remember it or are new to it, is a case about Louise Borglit. As I said, she was out in this area in a town called Herlev in Denmark. It's a park near some residential buildings. She was walking her sister's dog. It was in November. It's a pretty dark time of year here in Denmark in November. And in this park, she was, as I said, stabbed 11 times. Her nose was cut off. She was stabbed in the chest, the stomach, and the buttocks. And the suspect in this case has been asked a lot about his whereabouts around the time. And in some interviews, he has said that he was down here in Herlev train station close to the time of the murder. A friend of his gave him a bag with a knife. He disposed this knife. In court, he said, no, that's not true. I was in another town called Bagsvær, where I was eating with a friend and his kids. And the police have him on the surveillance tapes talking a lot about this murder. He was very interested in this murder. He was very interested in talking about how to stab a person to kill them and how much blood will come out of a person if you stab them. He has explained that with the undercover agent had a cover story that he had murdered a woman in Portugal and got away with it. So the defendant says, well, I was just trying to act up, be cool like him, and try to say I understand his situation because I had some knowledge. There's nothing on the tapes where you can say he said it. There's something that the prosecution believes to be an admission of guilt, but again, you have to say, is it enough to point to this guy? I'm not sure, but I'm not a judge or a juror in this case, so I'll only have to have my personal feelings about it. But this guy has told a story that he believes is consistent. The tapes have shown a person who was very interested in murders, a person who talked a lot to himself about being stupid to talk about things, but he never said anything about killing her. He has explained that it was somebody else who did it, but it wasn't him. And again, no physical evidence, no murder weapon, no DNA linking the suspect to the murder. So today in court, it was witnesses coming in and telling about the time of the murder, their interaction with the suspect. And the first on the stand today was a nurse who was in a part of a psychiatric team who had a talk with him, said, well, she found that he was sweet to her. His uncle had warned her about him, said she shouldn't be alone with him, but she said there was nothing there. He never did anything bad to her. They were together a few days before the murder, the time of the murder, where he seemed nervous and he was talking about he needed a place to stay and he needed to get some money to pay for things. And after the murder, when she heard about the murder and the suspect, the police had made a description in the papers. She told her boyfriend at the time, who was also a police officer, that she thought that this description fit the person she had met with, but she never contacted the police and told them anything about it because she thought, well, I don't know, and she had said it to her boyfriend, so she didn't feel it was necessary. The next witness was a kind of a mentor who in Denmark we have what's called the kommune. It's the city, and they sent a team out to try to help him because there had been a lot of incidents with the police with this guy. He was living in a room in the basement of his apartment because he hadn't paid his bill, so there was no electricity in his apartment, and they wanted to talk to him and try to see if they could help him. They went to the address, didn't connect to him, left some cards for him to contact them, and they made a meeting. They have heard about him that he was a dangerous man, so they met with him at the Gladsaxe Rådhus. That's where the city council is located, and they had a guard there, so if he got agitated, the guard could help them. But the meeting was quiet. He was talking a lot about his living situation, that he needed a place to stay. And the police said, well, earlier you said something about he was a very dangerous man. He couldn't remember that, and maybe it was taken out of context because he remembered him as a quiet, a bit nervous person. And he didn't remember anything, talking about anything with a knife. Then we went to the main witness in this case, an old woman who had been out walking her own dog in the same park at the time of the murder. She saw some flashing light, like the lights for a bicycle, and then she heard a scream, and she was very afraid because it was a gruesome scream. And then she heard another 15-20 seconds long scream, and then a person dressed in dark clothes came running at her, stopped, threw his arms out like I did nothing, didn't say anything to her, stopped, and she measured it after, exactly 10 paces from her. She looked at him, and then he ran off. She had been in shock. She was very afraid because of the screaming, and when she came home, she called her son, told her about it, and said, oh, it sounded like somebody got murdered. And he said, well, somebody did get murdered. So she was very afraid, had been in some kind of trauma. The police had sent a sketch artist out to make a picture of the suspect that she saw. And she was afraid she couldn't tell them how he looked because, as she said, he was stuck in my head. I couldn't get it out. But they worked together and made a composite of what she believed the suspect to look like, and she described him as a 20 to 30-year-old man, 170 centimeters tall, and looking like a drug addict, and with golden skin. That's her explanation of what she saw. She was asked, have you ever seen a picture of the defendant in this case? And she said, no, I have never seen anything. I was just talking to the sketch artist and helped her make this picture of the suspect. There has been a lot of talk about this old woman. She wears prescription lenses, has a really bad eyesight, but she was 100% sure that she was wearing her glasses at the time because she said, if I leave my home without my glasses, I always go back to get them. And she had felt distrusted because everybody kept asking her about her glasses and how big her glasses was. So she felt nobody believed her. But she said again, he looked like a drug addict. The first time she talked to the police, she said he was between 180 and 190 meters tall. Today she said 1.7 meters tall. So there's a small discrepancy there. But again, she had never seen him before, and there was nothing like that she pointed at the suspect because he was removed for court because she was afraid from him. And so again, a description, a person in a dark cloth, looking like a drug addict with golden skin. That's the description we got in day a day to in the today in court. Sorry, and again, this should be the crown witness. This was the one who was supposed to point at the suspect and say this was the guy. And the transcripts I have read, there has nothing like that in it. So, did it prove anything? I'm not sure. Then they talked with a person living in the same apartment complex. He said, I saw him come home between 7 or 8 on the time of the murder. That would be in the time frame right after the murder. When the defense lawyer asked him, "Are you sure you saw him?" He said, "No, I'm not really sure." Later that night, the defendant in the case made a lot of noise and yelled in the apartment complex, so they called the police. The next witness was the police officer who was in contact with him on the night of the murder, and they said, well, he lived in the basement, and they confiscated 0.4 grams of cocaine on him. And then he was asked, well, did you remember anything about the knife? And he said, well, I don't know. Said, when was this report made? It was made 2 years after the night of the murder because he was not a suspect at that time. So he had to go back and write the report when this defendant became the suspect in the case, and he couldn't remember anything about that night other than he had confiscated a bit of cocaine. The next witness was the friend that the defendant supposedly ate with at the time of the murder. This guy said, well, he knew the defendant, they had worked together, they had a okay friendship. The defendant was a bit, he could get angry, and he was a bit of a recluse because he had lost contact to his family, but they had a good friendship. He trusted him around his kids. There was nothing in it. There was something about, he had told earlier that the defendant had some paranoia, felt like people were following him, but he said, I don't remember him telling anything about that. He did remember that the defendant had a pretty big interest in knives and carried a knife, but as he said, it's like the young people do, it's probably just to feel safe. The police had his records for his credit cards and could see at the time around where the suspect should be eating with him and his kids. He was out shopping, and he said that can't be true. If I had my kids that weekend, I would be going to get them at that time. So it doesn't add up that the kids were with me when he was there. He was asked if the cocaine that they confiscated in the basement was his, because he had earlier said that he gave the defendant some cocaine. They used to smoke weed and do cocaine together. And he said, yeah, probably. And in an earlier police interview, he said he had given him the cocaine on the day before the murder. So again, this wasn't a great alibi for the defendant. This should be the one who said, yeah, I was with him at the time, so he couldn't have done it. So again, not a great day for the prosecution, but not a great day for the defense either. There wasn't enough concrete evidence again. The rest of the trial was just reading some deceased witnesses' statements, and one of them was that she saw the defendant arrive at his house 30 to 60 minutes after the murder, but that doesn't put him at the murder site. So again, a case that's very strange because there's no there. There's a lot of maybes, there's a lot of possibilities that it could have been him. He's not a nice guy. He is currently doing time because he tried to murder his ex-girlfriend. So there's no doubt in my mind he's a bad guy. But to be convicted, you still have to have reasonable doubt out of the way. And until now, it's hard for me to say that there's anything concrete in this case where I would point to and say, okay, this is the one thing that makes him guilty in my eyes. But we'll have to continue following this case. I will make an update the next time they are in court, and I hope you'll be following too. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you soon.